The elevator doors slid shut, trapping me inside with my boss, who had just finished telling everyone at the morning meeting that people like me would never amount to anything more than coffee fetchers. What he didn't know was that in exactly 47 minutes, the CEO would be announcing his retirement and HR would be introducing the board of directors to someone very familiar. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Mary, and 6 months ago, I was invisible. Not literally, of course, but in the corporate world of Henderson and Associates marketing firm in downtown Phoenix, I might as well have been a ghost haunting the 20th floor. I worked as a junior administrative assistant, which was really just a fancy way of saying I did everything nobody else wanted to do. My desk sat in the corner of the open office space, wedged between a broken printer that nobody bothered to fix and a filing cabinet that groaned every time someone opened it. The nameplate read Mary Chen, though most people just called me Hey You or simply snapped their fingers when they needed something. I'd graduated from Arizona State with a business degree, but you wouldn't know it from how I spent my days. Scheduling meetings I wasn't important enough to attend, organizing expense reports for people who made more in a month than I did all year, and yes, fetching an endless stream of coffee. My boss, Derek Williamson, was the kind of man who wore his authority like an expensive cologne, too much of it, and it made everyone around him uncomfortable. He had perfectly styled salt and pepper hair, drove a silver BMW that he parked in the visitor spot just because he could, and had a laugh that sounded like a hyena choking on its own arrogance. Derek was the regional operations manager, which meant he managed a team of 12 people and acted like he ran the entire Fortune 500. The morning that changed everything started like any other. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., a full hour before anyone else, because Derek expected his coffee ready and waiting when he strolled in at 8:45. Not 8:30, not 9 o'clock, exactly 8:45, with his medium dark roast, 2 sugars, splash of cream, stirred counterclockwise exactly 7 times. Yes, I counted. He'd made me remake it once because he claimed he could taste that I'd only stirred it 6 times. That Tuesday morning in March, I was at my desk organizing Derek's calendar when I overheard him talking to Janet Rodriguez, the HR director, near the water cooler. They were discussing the upcoming quarterly review meeting, and Derek's voice carried that particular tone he used when he wanted to sound important. The problem with this company, Derek was saying, adjusting his navy blue tie, is that we're too generous with our hiring practices. We bring in people for entry-level positions who simply don't have the vision or drive to contribute meaningfully to our success. Janet, who had always been kind to me, shifted uncomfortably. I think our junior staff works quite hard, Derek. Mary, for instance, has been handling multiple departments' administrative needs flawlessly. Derek's laugh echoed across the office space. Mary, please. She's been here 8 months, and she's exactly where she started. Some people are just meant for dead-end jobs, Janet. They lack the genetic makeup for leadership. It's not their fault. Not everyone can be executive material. But let's not pretend that filing papers and fetching coffee requires any real skill or ambition. I felt my cheeks burn as other employees glanced in my direction. Sarah Kim from accounting quickly looked away, pretending she hadn't heard. Marcus Thompson from the creative department suddenly became very interested in his computer screen. Even the new intern, Tommy Williams, seemed embarrassed for me. That seems rather harsh, Janet replied quietly. Harsh? It's realistic, Derek continued, his voice growing louder. Look at her background. State school, average grades, no connections, no family in business. She's what, 24, 25? If she had any real potential, we would have seen it by now. Instead, she's exactly what we hired her to be, support staff. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as everyone understands their place in the hierarchy. My hands trembled slightly as I tried to focus on the computer screen in front of me. I'd heard variations of this speech before, usually delivered to other managers when Derek thought I was out of earshot. But hearing it spelled out so clearly, with Janet standing right there, felt like being dissected in public. The worst part wasn't even Derek's words, it was the silence from everyone else. Nobody defended me. Nobody suggested that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been given opportunities to show what I could do because I spent 60 hours a week making sure everyone else could focus on their important work. Derek wasn't finished. The reality is that some people are workers and some people are leaders. Mary's a worker. She takes instructions well, she's reliable, she doesn't cause drama. Those are valuable traits for support staff. But leadership, vision, strategic thinking, you need a certain pedigree for that, a certain upbringing. You need to understand how business really works, not just the mechanics of scheduling meetings and organizing files. I'd been grinding my teeth so hard that my jaw ached. 8 months of arriving early, staying late, handling crises that weren't my responsibility, learning every system in the company, and memorizing everyone's preferences and quirks. 8 months of being treated like furniture with a college degree. What Derek didn't know, what nobody in that office knew, was that I had grown up understanding exactly how business worked. While my coworkers assumed I came from some modest middle-class family because I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic and brought homemade lunches, the truth was significantly more complicated. My father, Richard Chen, had built his first company when I was in high school. By the time I graduated college, Chen Industries had acquired 17 smaller firms across the Southwest, including a little marketing company in Phoenix that was struggling with outdated management and declining profits, a company called Henderson and Associates. The acquisition had been quiet, handled through a series of shell companies and investment groups. The original owners, the Henderson family, had retained a minority stake and stayed on as figureheads, but the real decisions were being made by a board of directors that answered to Chen Industries. The employees had no idea they were working for my father's company. I'd started working at Henderson and Associates against my father's advice. He'd wanted me to begin in the corporate offices of Chen Industries, learning the business from the executive level. But I'd insisted on understanding how companies really functioned from the ground up. How can I make good decisions about operations if I've never actually worked in operations? I'd argued. How can I understand what employees need if I've never been a regular employee? My father had agreed to let me work anonymously for 1 year, with the understanding that I would eventually transition into the executive training program. The plan had been for me to spend a few months in an entry-level position, learn the basics, and then gradually move up through the ranks while being mentored by the regional management team. That plan had lasted exactly 2 weeks, until I met Derek Williamson and realized that the regional management team consisted primarily of people who viewed leadership as an opportunity to feel superior rather than a responsibility to develop others. So I stayed. 8 months of watching, learning, and documenting exactly how the company functioned when the people in charge believed nobody important was paying attention. 8 months of seeing which employees actually solved problems and which ones just took credit for solutions. 8 months of understanding why Henderson and Associates had been struggling before my father's company acquired it. And now, listening to Derek explain to the HR director that I was genetically unsuited for anything more challenging than administrative work, I realized my year of research was about to come to an end. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. According to the agenda I'd helped prepare, the board would be reviewing the regional performance reports and discussing long-term strategic planning. What wasn't on the agenda was the announcement that the current CEO, James Patterson, would be retiring effective immediately, and that Chen Industries would be transitioning to more direct management of its subsidiary companies. I glanced at the clock, 9:43 a.m. In 47 minutes, Janet Rodriguez would be introducing the board of directors to their new regional oversight coordinator, the person who would be responsible for evaluating current management practices and recommending structural changes. Derek was still talking, his voice carrying across the office as he explained his theories about workplace hierarchy and natural leadership abilities. I wondered if he'd maintain the same confidence when he learned that his support staff had been taking detailed notes on his management style for the past 8 months. My phone buzzed with a text message from my father. "Ready for today? Remember, you don't have to prove anything to anyone." I looked around the office, at Sarah pretending not to listen, at Marcus staring at his screen, at Derek gesturing grandly as he explained why some people were simply born to follow orders. Then I typed back, "Actually, Dad, I think I do." The boardroom on the 22nd floor was a shrine to corporate intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Phoenix skyline, and the mahogany table could seat 20 people comfortably. Today, it hosted 12 board members, 3 executives, and Derek, who had managed to secure himself an invitation by volunteering to present the regional performance metrics. I wheeled in the coffee cart at exactly 10:15 a.m., just as I'd done for dozens of meetings over the past 8 months. The board members barely glanced at me as I arranged their cups and checked the temperature of the coffee. To them, I was part of the furniture, useful, invisible, and entirely forgettable. Derek stood near the presentation screen, adjusting his PowerPoint slides and practicing his opening remarks under his breath. He'd spent the entire morning perfecting his appearance, switching between 3 different ties before settling on the burgundy one that he claimed projected authority. His confidence filled the room like expensive cologne, and he nodded approvingly at board members as they took their seats. "Gentlemen, ladies," Derek began as the meeting officially started, "I'm excited to share some remarkable improvements in our regional operational efficiency." For the next 15 minutes, Derek presented charts and graphs that painted Henderson & Associates as a model of productivity and employee satisfaction. He talked about streamlined workflows, improved client retention, and increased profit margins. What he didn't mention was that most of those improvements had come from suggestions I'd made through the anonymous employee feedback system, or from processes I'd quietly implemented while handling multiple departments' administrative work. "Our success," Derek continued, clicking to a slide titled Leadership Philosophy, "stems from maintaining clear hierarchical structures and ensuring that each employee understands their role and capabilities. We've been very strategic about placing people in positions that match their natural skill sets and potential." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I refilled water glasses around the table, listening to Derek take credit for decisions he'd actively opposed. The improved filing system that had saved the company thousands in document retrieval time? I'd designed it after watching 3 different departments waste hours searching for contracts. The client communication protocol that had reduced complaints by 60%? I'd developed it after overhearing frustrated customers on Derek's speakerphone calls. Board member Patricia Hoffman, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, raised her hand. "Derek, these numbers are impressive, but I'd like to understand the human element. How do you evaluate employee potential, and what opportunities do you provide for advancement?" Derek's smile widened. "Excellent question, Patricia. I believe in honest assessment of capabilities. Some people are natural leaders, and others are natural followers. The key is recognizing these traits early and channeling them appropriately." "Can you give us a specific example?" asked board member Robert Martinez. Derek gestured toward me as I quietly collected empty coffee cups. "Perfect timing. Take our administrative assistant here, Mary, isn't it? She's been with us for 8 months, and she's exactly what we need in that role. Reliable, follows instructions well, doesn't overstep boundaries. She understands that not everyone is cut out for strategic thinking or leadership responsibilities. It's about knowing your place and excelling within those parameters." Several board members glanced at me with polite disinterest. I continued clearing the table, my face carefully neutral, while Derek warmed to his theme. "The mistake many companies make is promoting people beyond their capabilities just to seem progressive," Derek continued. "We focus on realistic expectations. Someone like Mary, state school education, no business connections, limited experience, she's much better suited to supportive roles. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The business world needs reliable support staff." Patricia Hoffman leaned forward slightly. "You seem very confident in your assessment of employee potential, Derek." 22 years in management teaches you to read people quickly, Derek replied. "I can usually tell within the first month whether someone has executive potential or if they're better suited for operational support." At 10:47 a.m., the boardroom door opened and Janet Rodriguez entered with a man I recognized but whom none of the board members had met before. Thomas Bradley, the newly appointed CEO of Chen Industries' Western operations. The room fell silent as Janet approached the head of the table. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special presentation today. As you know, Chen Industries acquired Henderson & Associates 18 months ago, and they've been conducting a comprehensive evaluation of our operations and management structures. Derek's confident smile flickered slightly. Like most of the staff, he knew about the acquisition in abstract terms, but the day-to-day operations had continued unchanged, and the new ownership had remained largely invisible. I'd like to introduce Thomas Bradley, Janet continued, who will be overseeing the transition to more integrated management practices. Thomas, a tall man with graying temples and an understated presence, nodded to the room. Thank you, Janet. I'm here today because Chen Industries believes in promoting from within whenever possible, and we've been very impressed with the talent we've observed at Henderson & Associates. Derek straightened in his chair, clearly calculating how to position himself favorably with the new leadership. Over the past year, Thomas continued, we've had someone working closely with your regional operations, providing detailed assessments of workflow efficiency, employee relations, and management practices. This individual has demonstrated remarkable insight into operational improvements and has a deep understanding of both the challenges and opportunities within this organization. The board members exchanged glances. Patricia Hoffman spoke first. This evaluation was conducted without our knowledge? The board was informed that Chen Industries would be conducting ongoing assessments, Thomas replied diplomatically. However, we believed that the most accurate picture of daily operations would come from embedded observation rather than formal reviews. Derek's face had gone slightly pale. Are you saying someone has been monitoring us? Observing, evaluating, and contributing. In fact, many of the operational improvements that have been implemented over the past 8 months, improvements that have significantly boosted productivity and employee satisfaction, have come directly from this individual's recommendations. I set down the coffee pot and moved to the back of the room, my heart beating faster as I realized the moment was finally arriving. The individual I'm referring to, Thomas continued, has demonstrated exceptional analytical skills, innovative problem-solving abilities, and most importantly, a genuine understanding of how to motivate and develop talent at all levels of an organization. Derek cleared his throat nervously. Well, I'm glad our management strategies have been effective. I've always believed in fostering improvement and recognizing potential wherever it exists. Thomas smiled slightly. Actually, Derek, that's exactly what we need to discuss. According to our embedded observer, there seems to be a significant disconnect between the official management philosophy and the actual treatment of employees in this regional office. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Board members shifted in their chairs, and Derek's earlier confidence evaporated like morning fog. I'm not sure what you mean, Derek said carefully. Our observer has documented numerous instances of managers dismissing employee contributions, making assumptions about capabilities based on irrelevant factors like educational background or family connections, and failing to provide advancement opportunities for clearly qualified individuals. Patricia Hoffman frowned. These are serious allegations, Mr. Bradley. They're documented observations, Thomas replied, and they've led us to some important conclusions about leadership effectiveness and employee development in this regional office. Derek's hands were visibly shaking now. Who exactly has been conducting this evaluation? Thomas looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room. Mary Chen, would you please join us at the table? The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the air conditioning humming in the ceiling vents. 12 board members, 3 executives, Derek, Janet, and Thomas all turned to stare at me as I walked from the back of the room to the conference table. Derek's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. The same man who had spent the morning explaining my limitations and lack of potential now watched in obvious confusion as the new CEO invited me to sit at the table usually reserved for people he considered my superiors. Ladies and gentlemen, Thomas announced as I took a seat directly across from Derek, I'd like you to meet Mary Chen, daughter of Richard Chen, founder and CEO of Chen Industries, and your new regional development coordinator. The aftermath of Thomas's announcement felt like watching a movie in slow motion. Derek's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally a sickly green pallor that suggested he might actually vomit right there on the mahogany table. Patricia Hoffman was the first to recover her composure. "Mr. Bradley, are you telling us that Miss Chen has been working in an administrative capacity while conducting a management evaluation?" "For 8 months," Thomas confirmed. Mary requested the opportunity to understand Henderson and Associates from the ground up before transitioning into her executive role. Her father and I initially thought a few weeks would be sufficient, but Mary convinced us that a longer observation period would provide more valuable insights. Board member Robert Martinez leaned forward, studying me with newfound interest. "And what exactly did you observe, Miss Chen?" I opened the leather portfolio I'd retrieved from my desk, the same portfolio Derek had seen me carry every day, but had assumed contained nothing more important than meeting schedules and supply orders. Instead, it held 8 months of detailed documentation about everything from workflow inefficiencies to employee morale issues. "The good news," I began, my voice steady despite the surreal nature of the situation, "is that Henderson and Associates has exceptional talent at every level. The administrative staff, junior associates, and mid-level managers are innovative, dedicated, and capable of much more than their current roles allow." Derek opened his mouth as if to speak, then seemed to think better of it and closed it again. "The challenging news," I continued, "is that there's a significant leadership problem that's preventing the company from reaching its potential." I pulled out a bound report and placed it on the table. "Over the past 8 months, I've documented 43 process improvements that were suggested by employees and either ignored or appropriated by management without credit. I've recorded 17 instances of qualified employees being passed over for advancement opportunities in favor of external hires with inferior qualifications. And I've observed a consistent pattern of managers making assumptions about employee capabilities based on factors that have no correlation with actual performance." The board members exchanged glances. This was clearly not the kind of presentation they'd expected from someone they'd assumed was there to serve coffee. "Can you give us specific examples?" asked board member Jennifer Walsh, a woman who'd built her reputation on demanding concrete evidence for every claim. "Absolutely." I flipped to a tabbed section of my report. 3 months ago, our client retention rate was declining because customers were frustrated with inconsistent communication. Sarah Kim from accounting identified the problem and proposed a tracking system that would ensure follow-up calls were made within 24 hours of initial contact. I looked directly at Derek, who was now staring at the table as if it might offer him an escape route. The proposal was submitted through the proper channels, but management decided it was too complex for implementation. However, I noticed that 2 weeks later, a remarkably similar system was announced as a management initiative. Client complaints dropped by 60% almost immediately. "Who implemented this system?" Patricia Hoffman asked. "I did," I replied, "during my lunch breaks and after hours with Sarah's permission and assistance. We tested it with a small group of clients first, proved it worked, then gradually expanded it across all accounts." Thomas nodded approvingly. "This is exactly the kind of grassroots innovation that Chen Industries values. What other examples do you have?" I turned to another section of my report. Marcus Thompson from Creative developed a social media strategy that could have increased our digital marketing effectiveness by an estimated 40%. His proposal included detailed analytics and projected ROI calculations. It was rejected because, according to the feedback he received, social media marketing was a trend that wouldn't last. Several board members looked genuinely shocked. Jennifer Walsh shook her head. "Social media marketing is fundamental to modern business strategy." Marcus knew that, I continued, so did most of the junior staff. But there seemed to be a belief among certain managers that ideas from lower-level employees were inherently less valuable than ideas from people with impressive titles. Derek finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "Mary, I think you're mischaracterizing the decision-making process. We have to consider resource allocation, timing, strategic priorities." You're right, I interrupted smoothly. Resource allocation is crucial, which is why I was confused when you approved a $15,000 expenditure for new office furniture, but rejected a proposal that would have cost $800 to implement and could have generated an additional $60,000 in revenue annually. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas made a note in his own portfolio while the board members absorbed the implications of what I was saying. But the most concerning pattern I observed, I continued, wasn't about missed opportunities or resource allocation. It was about how employees were evaluated and developed. I pulled out a different section of my report, one I'd hoped I wouldn't need to use, but Derek's performance this morning had made it necessary. I documented multiple instances of managers making categorical statements about employees' potential based on factors like educational background, family connections, age, or perceived social class. These assessments were then used to justify limiting opportunities for professional development. Derek's face had gone from green to gray. Mary, I think there might be some misunderstanding about management philosophy and practical decision-making. Actually, I said, opening my phone, I have recordings. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Derek's eyes went wide with panic. Don't worry, I added quickly. Arizona is a one-party consent state, and these recordings were made in public, workplace areas where there was no expectation of privacy. They're perfectly legal. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You've been recording conversations? Only when I witnessed behavior that seemed inconsistent with the company's stated values about employee development and equal opportunity, I explained. I wanted to ensure I had accurate documentation rather than relying on subjective impressions. Patricia Hoffman leaned back in her chair. I think we'd like to hear some of these recordings. I scrolled through my phone's files. This morning at 9:43 a.m., there was a conversation between Derek Williamson and Janet Rodriguez near the water cooler. Derek was explaining his philosophy about employee potential and advancement opportunities. Derek looked like he might actually faint. Mary, please, I think we can discuss this privately. Actually, Thomas interjected, I think the board should hear this. We're making significant decisions about leadership structure, and we need complete information. I pressed play on the recording. Derek's voice filled the boardroom, crystal clear and unmistakably arrogant. The problem with this company is that we're too generous with our hiring practices. We bring in people for entry-level positions who simply don't have the vision or drive to contribute meaningfully to our success. The board members listened in stunned silence as Derek's voice continued, explaining his theories about genetic makeup, leadership potential, and the importance of understanding one's place in the hierarchy. When the recording reached the part where Derek used me as a specific example of someone unsuited for anything beyond support roles, Jennifer Walsh actually winced. Some people are just meant for dead-end jobs, Janet. They lack the genetic makeup for leadership. It's not their fault. Not everyone can be executive material. But let's not pretend that filing papers and fetching coffee requires any real skill or ambition. When the recording ended, the silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Derek stared at his hands, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. The board members looked at each other with expressions ranging from embarrassment to outright anger. Robert Martinez was the first to speak. Derek, do you stand by these statements? Derek's voice was barely a whisper. Those comments were taken out of context. I was speaking in general terms about workforce management, not making specific judgments about individuals. You specifically mentioned Mary by name, Patricia Hoffman pointed out coldly, and you made very specific claims about her background, capabilities, and potential for advancement. I didn't know, Derek started, then stopped himself. You didn't know what? Thomas asked. That she was the owner's daughter? Does that change the validity of your assessment methods, or just the consequences? Derek opened and closed his mouth several times, clearly struggling to find an answer that wouldn't make his situation worse. Thomas turned to me. Mary, based on your 8 months of observation, what would you recommend regarding the regional management structure? Thomas's question hung in the air like a challenge. The board members waited, Derek looked nauseated, and I realized that this moment would define not just my future at Henderson & Associates, but the futures of every employee who had been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. My recommendations fall into 3 categories, I began, pulling out a final section of my portfolio: immediate structural changes, medium-term development initiatives, and long-term cultural transformation. I stood and moved to the whiteboard at the far end of the conference room. Derek flinched slightly as I walked past him, as if expecting some kind of retribution. But revenge wasn't what I was after. I wanted results. First, immediate changes. We need to restructure the evaluation and promotion process completely. Currently, advancement decisions are made by individual managers based on subjective criteria that often have nothing to do with job performance or potential. I drew a simple organizational chart on the whiteboard. I propose implementing a 360-degree review system where employees are evaluated not just by their direct supervisors, but colleagues, subordinates, and clients. This eliminates the bias that occurs when one person's prejudices can derail someone's entire career trajectory. Board member Patricia Hoffman nodded approvingly. That's a significant change from current practices. How would you handle managers who resist this new system? That brings me to my second recommendation, I replied, turning back to the board. We need comprehensive management training focused on identifying and developing talent, regardless of background. Managers who demonstrate bias in their evaluations or fail to show improvement after training should be reassigned to individual contributor roles where their personal prejudices can't damage other people's careers. Derek's head snapped up at this suggestion, and I could practically see him calculating whether this applied to him. The answer was obvious to everyone in the room. The third immediate change involves transparency. Every employee should have access to clear advancement criteria, salary bands, and development opportunities. No more mysterious promotion processes where decisions seem arbitrary or based on who plays golf with whom on weekends. Jennifer Walsh leaned forward with interest. You mentioned medium-term initiatives. What did you have in mind? I moved to a clean section of the whiteboard. Employee development programs that actually develop employees. Right now, training consists mostly of mandatory compliance seminars that everyone sleeps through. Instead, we should offer skills-based workshops, cross-department rotations, and mentorship programs that pair high-potential employees with effective leaders. And how do you identify high-potential employees? Robert Martinez asked. By looking at results, not resumes, I answered immediately. Sarah Kim increased efficiency in accounts receivable by 30% using a system she designed herself. Marcus Thompson's unofficial social media efforts for 3 clients generated more engagement than our previous 6 months of traditional marketing combined. Tommy Williams, our intern, identified a data entry error that saved us from a major compliance violation. These people demonstrated initiative, creativity, and business impact, the actual markers of leadership potential. Thomas made notes as I spoke. What about the cultural transformation aspect? This was the part I'd thought about most carefully. The biggest cultural problem here isn't incompetence, it's fear. Employees are afraid to suggest improvements because they've learned that ideas from lower-level staff are automatically dismissed. They're afraid to take initiative because they've been told to stay in their lane. They're afraid to challenge inefficient processes because questioning management is seen as insubordination. I gestured toward Derek, who was studying his hands like they contained the secrets of the universe. When managers consistently send the message that some people are inherently limited by their background or education, it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Talented employees stop trying to contribute, and mediocre managers never have to compete with better ideas from their subordinates. So how do we change that culture? Patricia Hoffman asked. By rewarding results and contributions, regardless of where they come from, I said. By promoting people based on performance rather than pedigree, and by making it clear that the company values innovation and initiative at every level. I returned to my seat and opened my portfolio to a page I'd bookmarked. I've identified 12 employees in this regional office who have demonstrated exceptional potential but have been systematically overlooked for advancement. With proper development opportunities, these individuals could significantly improve our operational efficiency, client satisfaction, and bottom line. Thomas smiled slightly. I assume Sarah Kim and Marcus Thompson are on that list. They're at the top of it, I confirmed, along with Janet Rodriguez, who has been managing HR challenges with remarkable skill despite receiving minimal support from upper management. Lisa Patterson from Client Services, who has maintained a 97% customer satisfaction rate while handling twice the normal caseload. David Chen, no relation, from the mailroom, who redesigned our entire document routing system and reduced processing time by 40%. Wait, Derek interrupted, speaking for the first time in several minutes. David from the mailroom? He's not even college educated. The silence that followed his comment was so profound that I could hear traffic noise from 22 floors below. Every person in that room realized Derek had just perfectly demonstrated the exact prejudice I'd been describing. Jennifer Walsh spoke first, her voice icy with disapproval. Mr. Williamson, are you suggesting that lack of a college degree automatically disqualifies someone from contributing valuable ideas? Derek's face went through another color change, this time settling on a mottled purple. No, of course not. I just meant... You meant exactly what you said, Thomas cut him off sharply. And you've just proven that the management issues Mary documented aren't isolated incidents. They're systematic problems that require immediate attention. Patricia Hoffman turned to me. Mary, what do you recommend regarding current management personnel? This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Derek looked at me with something approaching panic, clearly understanding that his career was in my hands. My recommendation is based on demonstrated leadership effectiveness, not personal feelings, I said carefully. Some managers have shown the ability to recognize and develop talent regardless of preconceptions. Janet Rodriguez, for example, has consistently advocated for employee advancement and has maintained high morale despite challenging circumstances. Janet looked surprised and pleased by the recognition. Other managers, I continued, looking directly at Derek, have shown patterns of behavior that actively harm employee development and company culture. These individuals should be given one opportunity to complete intensive management training and demonstrate measurable improvement in their leadership approach. If they can't or won't change their methods, they should be reassigned to roles where their biases can't damage other people's careers. Derek's voice was barely audible. And if someone wanted to change, if they realized they'd made mistakes and wanted to learn better leadership methods? I studied his face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus simple fear of consequences. After 8 months of observation, I'd become pretty good at reading people's motivations. Everyone deserves a chance to grow, I said finally, but that chance has to be earned through actions, not just words. Real change requires acknowledging specific mistakes, understanding why those mistakes were harmful, and implementing concrete behavioral changes. It's not enough to say, I'll do better. You have to prove it through consistent, measurable improvements in how you treat and develop the people you manage. Thomas closed his portfolio with a decisive snap. Mary, I think we've heard enough to make some immediate decisions. First, congratulations on your new role as Regional Development Coordinator. You'll be working directly with me to implement the changes you've outlined. He turned to address the full board. Second, we're implementing Mary's evaluation and transparency recommendations effective immediately. Third, we're establishing a 90-day probationary period for all management personnel, during which they'll demonstrate their ability to identify, develop, and promote talent fairly. Derek looked like he might cry. Mr. Bradley, I want you to know that I'm committed to learning and improving. I realize I've made some serious errors in judgment, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to become a better leader. Thomas studied Derek with the same analytical expression I'd seen my father use when evaluating business proposals. Derek, you'll be enrolled in an intensive leadership development program starting Monday. You'll also be working with Mary to understand the specific impact your management style has had on employee development. If you can demonstrate genuine improvement over the next 90 days, you'll retain your position. If not, we'll help you transition to a role that better matches your current skill set. The meeting concluded with handshakes, congratulations, and the slightly surreal experience of watching 12 board members treat me like an executive rather than support staff. As people filed out of the conference room, Derek approached me hesitantly. "Mary," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies, actually. I was wrong about your capabilities, wrong about your potential, and wrong about what makes someone qualified for leadership. I hope you'll give me a chance to prove I can learn from this." I looked at the man who had spent 8 months dismissing my contributions and explaining my limitations to anyone who would listen. The old Mary might have savored this moment of complete role reversal, but the new Mary, the regional development coordinator Mary, had bigger goals than personal satisfaction. "Derek," I said, extending my hand for a professional handshake, "let's focus on moving forward. You have 90 days to show me what kind of leader you can become when you stop making assumptions about people's potential. I'm genuinely hoping you'll surprise me." As I walked back to my desk, soon to be my temporary desk until my new office was ready, I realized that the most satisfying part of the entire morning wasn't Derek's humiliation or the board member's shock. It was the text message waiting on my phone from Sarah Kim. "I heard what happened in the meeting. Thank you for seeing our potential when nobody else would." 6 weeks later, Henderson and Associates felt like a completely different company. The transformation wasn't just cosmetic, it was fundamental, reaching into every department and changing how people interacted, contributed, and viewed their own potential. My new office on the 21st floor had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the mountains, but I spent most of my time on the main floor with the employees. Real leadership, I'd learned from watching both effective and ineffective managers, happened in the trenches, not from behind an executive desk. The first major change had been the implementation of the 360-degree review system. Instead of Derek having unilateral power over employee evaluations, every person now received feedback from supervisors, peers, and direct reports. The results had been eye-opening, particularly for managers who had assumed they were well regarded by their teams. Derek's initial 360 review had been brutal. His direct reports used words like dismissive, prejudiced, and demotivating to describe his leadership style. His peers noted that he rarely collaborated and often took credit for others' ideas. Even his supervisors' comments reflected concerns about his judgment and decision-making processes. But Derek had surprised everyone, including me, with his response to the feedback. Instead of becoming defensive or making excuses, he'd requested additional coaching sessions and had started scheduling weekly one-on-one meetings with each of his direct reports to understand their career goals and development needs. "Mary, I owe you an update," Derek said, appearing in my office doorway on a Tuesday afternoon. His entire demeanor had changed over the past 6 weeks. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by something that looked remarkably like humility. "Come in," I said, gesturing to the chairs across from my desk. "How are the coaching sessions going?" Derek sat down carefully, as if he wasn't sure he deserved to be comfortable. "Honestly, they're the most challenging thing I've ever done professionally. Learning that people have been afraid to share ideas with me for years, that's been hard to accept." He pulled out a notebook filled with handwritten notes. "But I wanted to show you something. Remember Tommy Williams, the intern I barely noticed before?" I nodded. Tommy had been working with us for 4 months, quietly completing assignments and staying largely invisible to management. "He approached me last week with a proposal for streamlining our client onboarding process," Derek continued. "6 months ago, I would have dismissed it without really listening. But I sat down with him for 2 hours, went through his analysis step by step, and realized he'd identified a major inefficiency that's been costing us time and client satisfaction." Derek's enthusiasm was genuine, and I found myself genuinely impressed by his progress. "What did you do with his proposal?" "I helped him present it to the operations team," Derek said, "and we're implementing it next month. But more importantly, I recommended Tommy for the junior analyst position that just opened up. He's exactly the kind of innovative thinker we need in that role." This was the Derek I'd hoped might emerge from the leadership training, someone who could recognize talent regardless of hierarchical position or first impressions. "How does it feel, managing differently?" Derek was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Terrifying initially. I realized I'd been using prejudice and assumptions as shortcuts to avoid actually evaluating people's capabilities. It's much harder to really listen, really assess, really develop talent, but it's also infinitely more rewarding. He looked directly at me. I understand now why you spent 8 months documenting our failures. Someone needed to hold us accountable, and traditional oversight wasn't working. You created change from the inside out. As Derek left my office, I reflected on how dramatically the office dynamics had shifted. The fear that had once permeated the workplace was gradually being replaced by innovation and collaboration. Sarah Kim had been promoted to senior financial analyst and was leading a cross-departmental efficiency initiative. Marcus Thompson was now heading up our digital marketing expansion with a budget and team that reflected the value of his innovative strategies. Lisa Patterson had become our new client relations manager, implementing customer service protocols that had increased satisfaction scores across the board. Most surprisingly, David Chen from the mailroom had been promoted to operations coordinator after his document routing system proved so effective that other Chen Industry subsidiaries were requesting implementation guides.
Knock, knock, Janet Rodriguez said, appearing at my door with 2 cups of coffee. Mind if I interrupt your deep thoughts? Always time for the person who kept this place running when management wasn't paying attention, I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Janet settled into a chair with a satisfied sigh. You know, in 15 years of HR work, I've never seen a cultural transformation happen this quickly or this thoroughly. What do you think made the difference? I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Accountability, Janet said immediately. For years, managers could make arbitrary decisions without consequences because nobody was documenting the patterns. Your evaluation forced everyone to confront the gap between our stated values and our actual practices. She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. But I think the real catalyst was hope. Employees who had given up on advancement suddenly saw people like Sarah and Marcus being promoted based on merit. It reminded everyone that excellence would be recognized. Have there been any unexpected challenges with the new system? I asked. Janet laughed. Mostly good problems. We have 3 times as many internal applications for open positions because people finally believe they have a fair chance at advancement. Employee satisfaction scores have jumped 40%, and we're getting unsolicited process improvement suggestions almost daily. Any resistance to the changes? Less than I expected, Janet admitted. 2 managers requested transfers to other Chen Industries properties rather than adapt to the new evaluation criteria, but most people have embraced the changes, especially once they saw the results. She pulled out her tablet and showed me a spreadsheet. Look at these numbers. Client retention is up 23%, project completion times have decreased by 18%, and our employee turnover rate has dropped to almost 0. The data confirmed what I could observe just by walking through the office. People were engaged, energetic, and invested in their work in ways that hadn't been visible 6 weeks earlier. There's something else, Janet continued. Word about our transformation has spread to other companies in the building. I've gotten 3 calls this week from HR directors asking about our evaluation and promotion processes.
This was unexpected but encouraging. What kind of questions are they asking? How to identify bias in management practices, how to create fair advancement opportunities, how to encourage innovation from all levels. Apparently, our employee satisfaction improvements have been noticed by other organizations dealing with similar cultural issues. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Bradley. Board meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Quarterly review of your initiatives. Bring success metrics. Speaking of metrics, I said to Janet, I need to prepare a presentation for the board tomorrow. What would you highlight as our biggest achievements? Janet didn't hesitate. The cultural shift from fear-based to opportunity-based thinking. 6 weeks ago, employees kept their heads down and followed orders. Now they're actively contributing ideas, taking initiative, and helping each other succeed. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Mary, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret spending 8 months in that administrative role? You could have started in an executive position and implemented these changes from day one. I considered her question carefully. If I'd walked in here as the owner's daughter with an executive title, every improvement would have been attributed to my authority rather than the merit of the ideas. Employees would have complied because they had to, not because they believed in the changes. And Derek? Derek would have smiled, nodded, and continued his old practices whenever I wasn't watching. By experiencing his management style as a target rather than a colleague, I understood exactly what needed to change and why.
Janet nodded thoughtfully. So the 8 months weren't about gathering evidence, they were about earning credibility. Exactly. Now when I recommend promoting someone like David or Tommy, people know I've seen their work firsthand. When I criticize management practices, it's based on documented experience, not theoretical concerns. As Janet left my office, I began preparing for the board presentation, organizing the data that would demonstrate the return on investment of treating employees as individuals rather than categories. My computer chimed with an email from an unexpected source, Rebecca Martinez, a former Henderson & Associates employee who had left 3 months before my transformation began. Mary, the email read, I heard through LinkedIn about the changes at Henderson & Associates. I left because I felt like my contributions weren't valued and advancement opportunities were limited. Would there be any possibility of returning to the company under the new management structure? I'd love to discuss how my skills might contribute to the innovative culture you've created. This email represented something I hadn't anticipated, the possibility that our transformation could attract back talented people who had left due to the previous management culture. I forwarded the message to Janet with a note about exploring rehiring policies for former employees who had left for cultural rather than performance reasons. As I worked on organizing the success metrics for tomorrow's board presentation, I realized that the most significant change wasn't visible in spreadsheets or satisfaction surveys. It was the fundamental shift from a workplace where people were told what they couldn't do to one where they were encouraged to discover what they could accomplish. The scared, invisible administrative assistant who had arrived 8 months ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood that real leadership meant creating conditions where everyone could succeed, regardless of their background, education, or starting position. Tomorrow's board meeting would mark the end of the 90-day evaluation period and the beginning of whatever came next. But tonight, walking through an office filled with engaged, optimistic, ambitious people, I knew we'd already accomplished something remarkable. The boardroom looked exactly the same as it had 3 months earlier, but everything else had changed. The same mahogany table, the same floor-to-ceiling windows, the same leather chairs, but the energy in the room was completely different. Instead of the tense, hierarchical atmosphere that had defined the previous meeting, there was a sense of collaboration and genuine excitement about the company's direction. I entered the room carrying a comprehensive presentation that would determine not just the success of my initiatives, but the future trajectory of Henderson & Associates. The board members were already seated, but this time they greeted me with warm professional acknowledgments rather than polite indifference. Mary, Patricia Hoffman said as I set up my laptop, we've been hearing remarkable things about the changes at Henderson & Associates. We're eager to see the official results. Thomas Bradley took his seat at the head of the table, looking pleased. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this transformation has exceeded our most optimistic projections. The numbers speak for themselves, but I'm more interested in the sustainable cultural changes that have emerged. Derek entered the room behind me, but his presence felt completely different than it had 3 months ago. Gone was the swagger and presumptuous confidence. In its place was a quiet professionalism and genuine engagement that suggested he'd internalized the lessons from his leadership training. Good morning, everyone, Derek said, taking a seat near the middle of the table rather than positioning himself prominently as he would have done before. I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's presentation. The past 3 months have been a learning experience that's fundamentally changed how I approach management and employee development. I began my presentation with a slide titled Transformation by the Numbers, but I knew the real story was more complex than any spreadsheet could capture.
3 months ago, Henderson and Associates was struggling with employee retention, declining client satisfaction, and missed opportunities for operational improvement, I began. Today, I'm pleased to report that we've not only reversed these trends, but established a foundation for continued growth and innovation. I clicked to the first data slide. Employee turnover has decreased from 18% annually to less than 2%. Client satisfaction scores have increased from 73% to 91%. Project completion efficiency has improved by 24%, and we're consistently coming in under budget due to streamlined processes and improved collaboration. Board member Robert Martinez leaned forward with interest. Those are impressive improvements, Mary, but what's driving these changes? Are they sustainable, or are we seeing a temporary bump from increased attention? That's exactly the right question, I replied, advancing to my next slide. The improvements are driven by systematic changes to how we identify, develop, and promote talent. They're sustainable because they're based on structural modifications rather than individual heroics or temporary interventions. I outlined the key policy changes we'd implemented: the 360-degree review system that eliminated bias in evaluations, the transparent promotion criteria that gave everyone clear advancement pathways, and the innovation recognition program that rewarded valuable contributions regardless of hierarchical position. But the most significant change, I continued, has been the cultural shift from fear-based compliance to opportunity-based engagement. Employees are no longer afraid to suggest improvements or take initiative because they know their contributions will be fairly evaluated and recognized. Jennifer Walsh raised her hand. Can you give us specific examples of this cultural change in action? Absolutely. I clicked on a slide featuring photos and brief bios of recently promoted employees. Sarah Kim, now our senior financial analyst, developed a cost-tracking system that saved the company over $60,000 in the past quarter. Marcus Thompson's digital marketing strategies have generated 43 new client leads in 8 weeks. David Chen created an interdepartmental communication protocol that's eliminated the project delays we used to experience regularly. Derek requested permission to speak. If I may add something to Mary's presentation, these aren't isolated success stories. What's remarkable is how many employees have stepped up with innovative solutions once they realized their ideas would be seriously considered. He pulled out his own notes. In my department alone, we've implemented 12 employee-generated improvements in the past 3 months. Process enhancements, client service innovations, efficiency protocols, all coming from people who previously felt their input wasn't valued. Patricia Hoffman looked impressed. Derek, how has this transformation affected your own approach to management? Derek paused thoughtfully before answering. It's been humbling and educational. I realized I'd been managing based on assumptions and biases rather than actual performance and potential. The 360-degree review process forced me to confront how my leadership style was limiting not just individual employees, but the entire team's effectiveness. He looked directly at me. Mary's documentation of management practices wasn't just an evaluation. It was a mirror that showed me how my prejudices were creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you tell people they're not capable of more, they stop trying to prove you wrong. Thomas made notes as Derek spoke. What specific changes have you made to your management approach? 3 fundamental shifts, Derek replied. First, I now evaluate employees based on results and initiative rather than background or first impressions. Second, I actively seek input from all team members regardless of their position or tenure. Third, I focus on developing each person's strengths rather than trying to fit everyone into predetermined categories. I advanced to my next slide, which showed comparative data from before and after the management training program. Derek's experience reflects the broader transformation we've seen across all departments. Managers who completed the intensive leadership development program showed measurable improvements in employee satisfaction, team productivity, and innovation generation. What about managers who resisted the changes? Robert Martinez asked. 2 regional managers requested transfers to other Chen Industries properties, I answered honestly. They weren't comfortable with the new evaluation criteria and preferred environments where their traditional management approaches would be more accepted. Thomas nodded approvingly. That's exactly what we hoped would happen. Self-selection by managers who couldn't adapt to evidence-based leadership practices.
I moved to a slide titled Unexpected Opportunities and explained how our transformation had attracted attention from other companies and former employees. We've received inquiries from 3 competing firms asking about our management training program. Additionally, 4 former employees have requested to return, citing the cultural changes as their primary motivation. Jennifer Walsh looked intrigued. Are you planning to rehire former employees? We're evaluating each case individually, I replied. For employees who left due to limited advancement opportunities or management issues rather than performance problems, we're definitely open to conversations. Their familiarity with our operations, combined with the improved culture, could be mutually beneficial. Patricia Hoffman leaned back in her chair, studying the data I'd presented. Mary, these results suggest that the problems at Henderson and Associates weren't about employee quality or market conditions, they were about leadership effectiveness. Exactly, I confirmed. We had excellent talent at every level. The challenge was creating systems that recognized and developed that talent appropriately. Thomas stood and moved to the window, looking out at the Phoenix skyline. The board has been discussing the long-term implications of this transformation. Mary, your success here has convinced us that Chen Industries should implement similar evaluation and development programs across all our subsidiary companies. This was an unexpected development. I'd focused on transforming Henderson and Associates, but the possibility of scaling these changes across a larger organization was both exciting and daunting. Additionally, Thomas continued, we'd like you to consider expanding your role. Instead of just Regional Development Coordinator for Henderson and Associates, we're proposing that you become Director of Organizational Development for all Chen Industries Western operations. The room fell silent as the implications of this offer settled in. Derek looked genuinely pleased by the proposal, which suggested his transformation was deeper than just professional compliance. The position would involve traveling to our other properties, conducting similar evaluations, and implementing culture change initiatives where needed, Thomas explained. You'd be creating a systematic approach to identifying and eliminating management practices that limit organizational potential. I felt a surge of excitement at the possibilities this role could create. Thomas, I'm definitely interested, but I'd want to ensure that Henderson and Associates continues its current trajectory. The cultural changes here are still developing, and sustained leadership will be crucial for long-term success. That's why Derek's development has been so important, Patricia Hoffman interjected. His transformation from biased manager to effective leader proves that people can change when given proper training and accountability. Derek smiled, and for the first time since I'd known him, it looked completely genuine. I'd be honored to continue leading the team here while Mary expands these initiatives to other properties. The past 3 months have been the most professionally rewarding of my career. Thomas returned to his seat. Then it settled. Mary, congratulations on your promotion to Director of Organizational Development. Derek, you'll be taking over as Regional Operations Manager permanently, with the understanding that you'll maintain the cultural standards and evaluation practices Mary has established. As the meeting concluded with handshakes and congratulations, I realized that what had started as a personal mission to document workplace bias had evolved into something much larger, a systematic approach to creating organizations where talent can flourish, regardless of background, education, or hierarchical position. Walking out of that boardroom for the second time in 3 months, I understood that the real victory wasn't Derek's transformation or my promotion. It was the knowledge that dozens of employees who had once felt invisible and undervalued now had genuine opportunities to build meaningful careers and contribute their best ideas. The scared, overlooked administrative assistant was truly gone, replaced by someone who had learned that the most powerful way to change a system was to understand it completely before trying to fix it. 1 year later, I stood in the lobby of Chen Industries headquarters in Los Angeles, watching a familiar scene unfold. A young woman in her mid-20s sat behind the reception desk, efficiently managing phone calls while helping visitors navigate the building directory. Her nameplate read Jessica Wu, and based on the way she handled multiple tasks simultaneously while maintaining professional composure, I suspected she was overqualified for her current position. My role as Director of Organizational Development had taken me to 17 different Chen Industries properties across 5 states. Each location had its own version of the Henderson and Associates story. talented employees trapped by biased management, innovative ideas dismissed due to hierarchical prejudices, and systemic barriers that prevented companies from reaching their potential. Miss Chen, a voice interrupted my observation. I turned to see Michael Rodriguez, the general manager of Chen Industries' Los Angeles operations, approaching with a slightly nervous expression. Michael was exactly the type of manager I'd become expert at evaluating. Mid-40s, expensive suit, confident handshake, and the subtle defensiveness that suggested he'd heard about my work at other properties. In the year since my promotion, word had spread throughout the Chen Industries network about the undercover evaluations that had transformed struggling subsidiaries. Let's start with a tour of the facilities, I suggested. I'd like to meet some of your team members and observe the daily operations. As we walked through the bustling office space, I employed the same observational techniques that had served me well at Henderson and Associates. Who made eye contact during introductions? Which employees seemed genuinely engaged versus merely compliant? How did managers interact with different levels of staff? This is our customer service department, Michael explained, gesturing toward a section where 24 employees worked in cuticles. We handle support for over 15,000 clients across the Western region. I noticed immediately that the department had an interesting dynamic. The supervisors, all middle-aged men in business casual attire, spent most of their time in glass-walled offices reviewing reports. Meanwhile, the actual customer service work was being handled primarily by younger employees, many of them women and people of color, who demonstrated remarkable skill at de-escalating difficult situations and finding creative solutions to complex problems. Who designed your current customer service protocols? I asked Michael. Our supervisory team developed those procedures based on industry best practices, he replied with practiced confidence. I watched as a customer service representative named Angela Martinez handled a particularly challenging call involving a billing dispute. She not only resolved the immediate issue, but also identified a system glitch that had caused similar problems for other clients. Instead of escalating the discovery to management, she made a note in what appeared to be a personal tracking document. Angela, I said, approaching her desk after she'd finished the call, that was impressive problem solving. How often do you encounter systemic issues like that one? Angela glanced nervously at Michael before answering. Oh, maybe once or twice a week, usually small things that don't really affect the bigger picture. And what do you do when you identify these patterns? I document them in case they become more serious, she said carefully, but mostly we just handle each situation individually. This response was nearly identical to what I'd heard at a dozen other properties. Talented employees identifying problems and solutions, but lacking channels to contribute their insights to organizational improvements. During my week-long evaluation of the Los Angeles office, a clear pattern emerged. The company was performing adequately, but missing significant opportunities for improvement because management was systematically ignoring input from their most knowledgeable employees. Angela Martinez had developed an informal database of recurring customer issues that could have prevented hundreds of support calls if implemented systematically. Kevin Park, a junior analyst in the financial department, had identified discrepancies in vendor contracts that were costing the company thousands of dollars monthly. Maria Santos, who worked in facilities management, had designed an energy efficiency protocol that could reduce operating costs by 15%. None of these innovations had been formally recognized or implemented because the managers assumed that valuable ideas came from people with impressive titles rather than people with direct operational experience. The breakthrough moment came during my exit interview with Michael Rodriguez. I'd spent the week documenting the same patterns of bias and missed opportunities that had characterized Henderson and Associates before its transformation. Michael, I said, sitting across from him in his corner office, I've identified significant untapped potential in your organization. His defensive posture was immediately visible. I think our performance metrics speak for themselves, Mary. We're meeting all our quarterly targets and maintaining acceptable satisfaction scores. You're right, I agreed. You're performing adequately, but adequate isn't the same as optimal. What if I told you that implementing employee-generated improvements could increase your efficiency by 25% while reducing costs and improving client satisfaction? Michael's skepticism was evident. I'd say that sounds optimistic.
Our management team has years of experience, and we've already implemented the most obvious improvements. I opened my portfolio and pulled out a document I'd prepared. This is a summary of innovations I observed during my week here. All of them were developed by your current employees during their regular work duties. As Michael read through Angela's customer service analysis, Kevin's vendor audit findings, and Maria's efficiency protocols, his expression gradually shifted from skepticism to amazement. These are actually very sophisticated analyses, he admitted. I had no idea our support staff was capable of this level of strategic thinking. That's exactly the problem, I replied gently. Your support staff includes a former business consultant who took this job for family reasons, a recent MBA graduate who's building experience before starting her own company, and a logistics expert who relocated from Chicago and needed immediate employment. You have incredible talent, but you're not creating systems to recognize and utilize it. Michael set down the document and looked at me directly. So, what do you recommend? Over the next hour, I outlined the same transformation strategy that had worked at Henderson & Associates and 16 other Chen Industries properties. Comprehensive evaluation systems that looked at results rather than resumes, transparent advancement criteria that gave everyone clear pathways for growth, innovation recognition programs that rewarded valuable contributions regardless of hierarchical position. The most important change, I explained, is cultural. When employees believe their ideas will be fairly considered, they start contributing at levels you never imagined possible. Michael was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. Mary, I want to be honest with you. This approach challenges everything I thought I knew about management hierarchy and organizational structure. I know, I said. That's exactly how Derek Williamson felt when we started his leadership development program. How is Derek doing, by the way? Michael asked. I heard about the transformation at Henderson & Associates, but I wasn't sure if the changes were sustainable. I smiled, thinking about my most recent visit to Phoenix. Derek has become one of our most effective managers. Last month, Henderson & Associates was recognized by the Phoenix Business Journal as one of the best places to work in Arizona. Derek was quoted in the article talking about the importance of recognizing talent at every organizational level. And his team? Sarah Kim was just promoted to Regional Financial Director for all Southwestern operations. Marcus Thompson is leading a digital marketing initiative across 12 Chen Industries properties. David Chen, the former mailroom employee, is now heading up operational efficiency for the entire Phoenix region. Michael shook his head in amazement. A year ago, those people were considered support staff. They were always capable of leadership, I corrected. They just needed systems that recognized their capabilities and provided opportunities to demonstrate them. As I prepared to leave Los Angeles, having secured Michael's commitment to implement the comprehensive transformation program, I reflected on how dramatically my own life had changed since that morning when Derek had mocked my dead-end job.
The scared, invisible administrative assistant who had endured months of condescension and dismissal had become someone who specialized in finding and developing overlooked talent across multiple organizations. But more importantly, I'd learned that the most effective way to create change wasn't through authority or mandate. It was through patience, documentation, and the persistent belief that everyone deserved opportunities to reach their potential. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica Wu, the receptionist I'd observed on my first day in Los Angeles. Miss Chen, I wanted to thank you for taking time to talk with me about the management training program. I've been accepted into the leadership development track, and I start next month. I never thought someone would see potential in a receptionist, but you helped me realize I have more to offer than I knew. 6 months later, Jessica Wu was promoted to Administrative Operations Coordinator, overseeing efficiency improvements across 3 departments. Her first initiative, a communication protocol she'd developed while working reception, reduced interdepartmental response time by 40%. Today, as I prepare for my next evaluation at Chen Industries' Seattle property, I carry with me the knowledge that transforming organizations isn't about finding new talent. It's about recognizing the talent that already exists and creating systems that allow it to flourish. The story that began with a boss mocking my dead-end job had become something much larger,
A systematic approach to building workplaces where innovation comes from everywhere, leadership is earned through results rather than pedigree, and every employee has genuine opportunities to contribute their best ideas. Sometimes the most powerful way to change a system is to experience it from the bottom up, document its failures, and then build something better from the inside out. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is exactly the person who can see most clearly what needs to change. Derek had been wrong about many things, but he'd been accidentally right about one. Not everyone is cut out for leadership. But the criteria for identifying leaders has nothing to do with background, education, or family connections. It has everything to do with results, integrity, and the ability to recognize potential in others, regardless of where they start or what assumptions people make about their capabilities. That lesson, learned through 8 months of being underestimated and dismissed, had become the foundation for transforming dozens of organizations and hundreds of careers. And it all started with a boss who thought he knew exactly what I was capable of, and a hidden truth that would prove him spectacularly wrong. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.